Hey everyone, my name's AndrewHess. Today, let's go over a few different flows with files. Let's start with create an email with attachments from files. Let's take those images and let's put them in the body of an email. Then let's go back to Power Apps and let's do an attachment control. Let's send multiple attachments. Let's do it the easy way. And we can also discuss a couple more scenarios. As always, there's chapters in the video. If you want to skip to a certain topic, let's get into it. So last week, we created this very simple Power App. It sends an image that we upload through Power Automate. Simply, it uses name, file content, and creates the file in SharePoint. If you want to see how we did that, the video from last week will be in the description. But today I wanted to do more things. I wanted to manipulate this file. I wanted to push it around. But first, let's start with an email. So after we upload it to SharePoint, let's do an email. So in an email, and if we send an email, V2, we're going to send it to myself. The subject will be with file content. And in the body, it says, hey, check out the attachment. All right, so notice right here, what's very important is there's two parts to every file. There's the name and the content. So in the name, we'll put in the name and the file content in here, down here. All right, so let's give it another test. Let's see if I get an email. It should all work. Everything is right. Everything's in the base64 format. It should pass through into an email. So we have to test it in Power Apps. So in Power Apps, after it's saved, give it a few seconds. I run the flow again, and it failed. And one thing you need to remember is always give it a good refresh. Give your Power Automate a good refresh. That's what that error that happens to me a lot is. Once you give it a good refresh, click Run again after it's saved. It then aligns, and then you don't get that error. So let's check out Outlook. So in Outlook, right, it is an attachment here. It's not embedded in the body of the email, but you can tell already that the image is working. Everything's working to be as expected. But what if I don't want it to be an attachment? What if I want my image to be in the body of the email? So let's create a table first. So in Power Automate, if you come in right here, let's make sure I'm zoomed in a good bit. If you come in right here to the code view, you can convert to HTML. Let's create a very simple table in the HTML. Table, th, name, ending, th. Then we'll do image. Oh, we forgot our th again. So th, image, ending th. Okay. Now let's do the inside of the table. And that's going to be tr, td, and inside the td will be our name, ending td. And the next part, if you notice, it doesn't let us put the file content in there. So if we scroll all the way down, there's no file content. We can't get to this file content. So what we need to do is convert the file content to a friendly format for HTML. So above the email, I'm going to do a compose. Now you could do a variable if you wanted, but I'm just going to do a compose. And I'm going to build out this FX formula to use our base64 format of our file and put it in HTML. And to do that, I'm going to use a concat statement. So I'm going to say expression concat, just because I want to build all this together and make it one line. And I'm going to say, in single quotes, data. As we explained in our last week's video, we need the MIME type, or just the type of file it is. And the type of file it is an image. It's a PNG. So that's our MIME type right there, is image PNG. And of what type of PNG format is it? It's in base64. So it's in base64 format. And we're going to do a comma here and a single quote. So we're giving it the MIME type. Now maybe you want to change this in Power Automate. Maybe you want to change this in Power Apps, where you grab the actual type of file it is so you can push different types of files. And so right here, we're now going to add the content bytes. So if I scroll all the way down here, we're going to add the file content in here. So trigger body content bytes, we named it file content, but this is the content bytes. So if we look here and we hover over, and if you zoom in way down in there, concat data image, PNG base64, the trigger body, and the content bytes. So now that we've done that compose statement, we have concatenated and we got the base64 of the file type. Now in our TD or our table data, we need to write some HTML. And to write some HTML, I'm going to say it's an image of an image tag. And I'm going to say the source is equal to our compose statement. And then I'm going to put it in double quotes. And there's more you can add in here. If you want to say width equals 100%, and then end your table data, end our table completely. Now let's give it another test. So now that we've built out this HTML, we've said it's an image source, and we gave it our concat statement of the base64 content. Let's save and give it another test. So we're back in Power Apps. We click Run Power Automate Flow. Give it a second. We might hear a noise. We did. We heard that noise. I think you heard that noise from my computer. We got a new email. And there it is. We have a terrible table with no border of our image. So let's try that again. Let's give our table a border. Let's give our table a border and maybe some padding in there. So let's say border equals, let's give it 1 and cell padding of maybe a 5. Let's give it another test. And maybe even the width of 100% is too much. Here we go. We got it again. We have a nice table border with an image. Pretty neat, huh? So now we've built that into the body of our email. Now, one thing to be certain is the way that Outlook client renders is different than the way that the browser renders. So you have to be careful and double check both. Does your image work in the browser, and does this work in Outlook client? So with the client version, it will not render the image because it really strips away that base64 format for security reasons. So instead of doing the base64, you can pass the image location. So the location for me is going to be my tenant with the site collection. And then we can select on the path when we created the file. So when we create the file, we add the path, click Save, test the Power Automate again. Most likely you do need permissions to this document in order to view it, right? There's security things that you need to think about. So we run the Power Automate flow. We listen for that sound. We see the table. Here it is. It's now generated with the image, and we have access to the document. So two different ways to do it. One, base64. They're going to need to open it in the browser mode because the client is going to not render the base64. Another is to pass the path and give permissions. So both of those options are available to you. Now let's do not a picture. Let's do an attachment of some sort. With every SharePoint list, there's an attachment column. And when I add a list, and with every list or form, you can go to Fields, add a field, and we can add attachments. Now in here, there is a card that I like to grab out of a SharePoint list. In the tree view, you can see right here, we have data card value. And I'm grabbing this section right here for attach file. I cut that out. I'm going to delete my form. And now in my main container, I'm going to paste the attachment file right back in there. All right, so we have our attachment file here. It has a red X, and obviously our flow does too. And say, hey, well, what's the default property? Well, there's no default property. We're not doing a default property. There's no tooltip at this time. Border, we're just going to leave that blank. The Y value, it's looking for a Y value. We'll just say it's 5. So there we go. We removed all those errors right now. And when I add an attachment here, so let me add an attachment. So this time I added a PDF file. No longer are we doing images. Now we added a PDF file. And in our button, what we want to do is we want to change the value here to our data card value 3. So right now it's named data card value 3 for me. You can see this little paperclip icon. That's very important. I'm going to rename it to my file. This is very important. People ask me questions, where do I get my file from? I renamed this to my file. And now up here in our content bytes for an attachment, what you may not realize is that Power Apps will allow you to have more than one attachment. You don't just have to have one. So the issue is what if there's more than one? So the simple solution right now is to say you can only do one attachment at a time. So what we'll do is we'll say the name is the first of our my file dot attachments dot name. So we're saying, hey, you're only doing one file at a time. I'm going to put this in the same spot up here. And then down here for content bytes, instead of name, I'm going to use .value. All right, so take a look at that. Let's format that. So I'm running the flow again. For my first thing, I'm adding the name in there, and I'm doing the name twice. This is the name that we're going to see. This is the metadata. So let me give this a save. In Power Automate, instead of showing this image, we're just going to say, we're going to take out the send an email. And now we're just going to create the file. I'm going to give it another save. So let's go back to Power Apps, run Power Automate Flow, check out our SharePoint. So if we go to my SharePoint list, we then see that I have a PDF here. This is a little cheat sheet that I made. How to plan a Power Automate Cloud Flow in 30 seconds. So now the PDF is viewable in Power Apps in a document library. It all pushed through correctly. All that worked great, but what happens if there's multiple files? Now there's multiple files, and there's many different ways to do this, right? The easiest way is to run a loop. For all. For all what? For all my attachments. So for all my file dot attachments. Run this loop. Don't grab the first anymore. We don't need to identify it. Just the name and the value. So for all my attachments, for all the attachments in there, run the flow one time for each of the attachments. So I'll click play, Power Automate, run the flow. Let's go check out SharePoint. This time it's going to run the flow 2 times for each of the attachments in there. We'll go back to SharePoint, click refresh. We can see that both of these re-uploaded a few seconds ago. So it overwrote the file. And then we also have our PowerPoint in here. Both files are now uploaded to SharePoint. So that's how you do it for multiple attachments. Let's do something different. Now, let's say we have a list and it has attachments. Right? So we have a list and it has attachments and maybe even multiple attachments. A new flow, let's do automated this time. And when create list grab attachments. So when an item is created, not modified, let's say when an item is created, so you got to be careful. Whenever you do when an item is created or modified, you have to be careful of that infinite loop, right? Because you modify, it triggers the flow, runs forever. You got to be careful of that. So when an item is created, in our list, in Andrew's list, what are we going to do? Let's send an email with our attachments. How about that? Let's just send an email. Let's send an email right here with Outlook. And who's it going to send it to? We're going to send it to me. All right. So there's other things we can do. Let's just leave all that as it is. But what we really want to focus on is this section right here. And that's our attachments. So we can do add new, and look at how it does that. And take a look at this. If I click this button, show entire array, what does that look like? I know it's an array, but it looks very similar to JSON. It's an array. And notice what we're seeing, content bytes and name. Right now they're null. So let's go back to this view. When an item is created, what do we want to do? In between our send an email. In here, we actually are not grabbing attachments. Let's just give the flow a run, a test while we're here. Let's do a manual test. We're just going to give our flow a test in here. I'm going to add a new item in SharePoint. So test with attachment. We're going to add an attachment. It's a thumbs up icon. I'm going to click save, and we're going to wait for our test to finish. And there it was. That was really quick. It grabbed it, it sent an email. Nothing was in the email. We didn't add the attachment, but when an item is created, if we click at show raw outputs, we got all this beautiful data. If we look at all of our data in here and we look at the body, you know, all this in the body, that's what's most important, is in the body. We can see all that wonderful data, but you know what's missing? We have author, editor, claims. What's missing is the attachment content. So let's take a look at our actions for SharePoint. So if we type in attachment, we move me out of the way. In here, we have a few options, right? We have get attachment content. So first what we need to do is we need to grab all the attachments. And notice that word, get attachments. Notice that it's plural. So we're going to grab our SharePoint homepage and the SharePoint list name. And then the ID field is going to be the one when we created the item. All right, so now we're going to grab those attachments. So this time I'm going to test with an automatic test, the one that succeeded. I'm going to run the flow again, and this time we grab the attachments. But let's take a look in here. Inside the attachments, in the outputs, right, we can see, and if you zoom in here, you can actually press the pretty print button and it makes it look great, right? So if you're using Microsoft Edge, you can press the pretty print button and then you can start reading this. So we can see here, we have the URL in the body of our attachment. We have the thumbs up, what the name of it is. We have the type, the OData type, and the ID. But once again, what are we missing? We're missing the content. So now let's go back and let's say get attachment content. So now we're going to say get attachment content. Now notice before this was get attachments, multiple. What is this? Get attachment content, which is one at a time. So what's going to happen when we put the ID in this field? So as soon as we go to our list, Andrew's list, and we go to the ID, and we pass in the file identifier from get attachments, right here, ID file identifier. What happens when we put it in there? Boom, a for each loop. Why? Because this is get attachments and this is get attachment content. So you have to get one at a time through the loop. And to put it in a for each loop, maybe we should create an array. So let's create and initialize a variable, and it's going to be of type array. And the value is going to be blank at first, right? So I'm just saying, hey, at first it's blank. Always give your array a variable name. Array, our variable, or let's call it array attachments. All right, so we initialized a variable. We gave it a name, array attachments. It's blank right now. We get attachment contents and a for each loop. Now, let's append to our array variable, because there could be more than one attachment. Append to array variable, and we're going to use our array attachments. And now let's build out that content bytes part. Name. So once again, name. Then we use the lightning bolt, and we can grab the display name or the name of the file. So let's see, we have attachment content. How about display name? And then we're going to do a comma and content bytes. And what goes here is the attachment content. That's our content bytes. Okay. And then we're going to end a squiggly. And that should grab each one and put them in an array. Now, end our send email attachment, in the show all. We can add a new item one at a time, right? Or since we've built out this array variable, we can just drop in our array. All right, so let's give it a try. Save. Let's put in multiple attachments. So let's create a new list item. Let's give a test, manual test, run. This time let's create multiple attachments. And let's add 2 files in there. So this time we added 2 files in there. Let's click save. Let's check out Power Automate, which it's spinning right now. It's waiting to notice that change. There we go. It ran successfully. Everything looks green. Everything looks good. Let's look in here. Let's take a look at the append array variable. Let's look at the, notice that you see the name, the content bytes. Let's look at the outputs, show raw. That's the inputs, okay? And look at the inputs. You see that? You see that content type? That's our MIME type and content. And this looks like base64 format, right? For each one. If we skip through, it'll be a different one. Let's check out our email. In our email, we now have 2 attachments. We grabbed the first image that I have here, thumbs up, and the second image, adding it to an attachment. So you have to be careful with that for each loop as it loops through, and just build out that array through JSON by appending to an array. So that's how you can grab an attachment from SharePoint list, push it to an email. I don't know, push it somewhere else. The end goal is up to you. Now I had other questions from many of you. I had other questions from many of you. One was, how do you get that image in an Excel column? So one thing that you probably could do is run script from a SharePoint library. And that sounds like another entire video, is run a script from a SharePoint library, add an image to an Excel document. Maybe we'll get into that into the future too. Another question was, how do I get a file on my personal computer? And you can push a file to OneDrive for Business and then sync your OneDrive for Business to your computer. Moving it to your actual computer is going to require what's called Power Automate Desktop, which is beyond the cloud flow, right? That's going to be more of a RPA, which is robotic process automation. So if you want to move a file directly to your computer, you're going to have to use Power Automate Desktop in order to do that. And I'm not going to go through that in this video. Creating a PDF with tables inside tables and doing all that complexity. When you use the word connector, there are limitations to it. There are third-party tools like PlumSail or other third-party tools that can help you get those documents working. But there are tricks to create PDFs of tables that you make. And maybe that will be our next video. So thank you all for watching. My name is Andrew Hess, and I'll see you next week.